Welcome, everybody, to another edition of All In with Art Stapleton, a New York Giants podcast brought to you by NorthJersey.com and The Record. I'm your host, Art Stapleton, and I am coming to you live in the moment from one of the booths at MetLife Stadium. And, boy, you know what? The New York Giants continue to find ways to defy the odds, and just when you want to think that they have a chance, well, they go and find new ways to lose. Today, your final score, 14-11. The New York Giants fall to the New Orleans Saints. And let's go through this. You had a holding penalty that took back a punt return for a touchdown. You had a personal foul on a field goal that took 3 points off the board. And then you had a field goal as time expired with an unbelievable comeback, because when Drew Lock threw an interception right around the 2-minute mark, there was no way anybody in this building thought the Giants were getting the ball back and would have another opportunity. And yet they did. And Drew Lock busts off a wild scramble, then a pass to Malik Neighbors. They have a chip shot, 35-yard field goal from Grant Guineau, and the kick is blocked. And the game is over. And Giants tank celebrates, and the team is devastated, and it's now 8 straight losses. You have a winless season at home right now with 2 games left at home. Can they get off the schneid? Well, certainly doesn't look like it next week against the Baltimore Ravens here. And then the final home game is against the the former Baltimore, now the Indianapolis Colts in Week 17. So it's pretty dire here for the New York Giants. And where do we go? Well, we go back to the beginning. About 2 hours before the game, we're in the press box, and you kind of look up above MetLife Stadium, and it's a flashback. And I wrote this in a post-game column that posted on NorthJersey.com right before I got on here. The idea was that this was going to be the 100th season for the New York Giants, and they were going to dip into their past. And it was going to be a celebration of everything New York Giants. And they go and they pick the 2024 season to relive and recreate the worst moments of a franchise's history. And I bring up 2 hours before kickoff because, as I wrote on NorthJersey.com this week, it's been a decade of despair since Tom Coughlin left in 2015. And I went through every year talking about the regimes, the McAdoo and Pat Shurmur and Joe Judge, the Gettleman mistakes, how everything is set up for Joe Shane and Brian Dable, and how everything before them has set them up to be where they are right now. But I led that story with the flashback from 1978. 3 weeks after the Miracle of the Meadowlands, a group of about 95 fans gathered in the Ramada Inn in Clifton. They rented a room, $3 each, and they ended up putting together a collection to rent a small plane to go over the old Giant Stadium in the Meadowlands with a message. The 15 years and how it was enough. And it was a message for then Wellington Mara to change things. And everybody looks back at that moment as kind of a seminal moment in franchise history, because George Young the Giants were encouraged to hire George Young, future Hall of Famer, as general manager. Ultimately, after Ray Perkins, Bill Parcells gets hired from defensive coordinator to head coach. Then the Giants go on to win 2 Super Bowls, everything they do in the 80s, and then capped off in 90 with the Super Bowl win over the Bills, the second one, 21-25. And all of a sudden, everyone looks back on those moments as, oh, what great memories. Well, anyone who lived through them did not appreciate them. So fast forward to this morning, and, you kind of had a feeling something was going to come about. It was either going to be billboards or a plane, and someone rented a plane. We know it wasn't Malik Neighbors. He said after the game, I didn't pay for a plane. So, tongue in cheek. But it's no laughing matter at this point, and none of the Giants are laughing about it. But the reality is you're not sending a message. That's not an embarrassment to John Mara, in my opinion. But it's just a reminder of where the Giants are. And there are a lot of people here who are either living in the 70s and see reminiscent memories, or they want to point back to that thinking that you're going to get a change that's going to come. And I think the reality is the message on the plane that was flying over MetLife today was, Mr. Mara, enough. Please fix this dumpster fire. And the ironic part of this whole thing is that what Malik Neighbors said is right. I didn't pay for the plane. And he said it, not really getting the full picture of everything. But the reality is everyone here on these current Giants are paying for the last 10 years of what this organization has become. And I know some of you will listen to this and say, oh, but here's Art again, defending everyone here. But that's not the reality of it. The reality is that these Giants are paying for past sins, for the sins of the people that came before them. 2 years ago, when John Mara hired Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll, he went out of the comfort zone, went out of the organization. Everyone begged him to go out of the organization, and that's what he did. And now year 3 is not even over, and everyone is ready to move on. And again, where is the patience that was promised? Well, the patience was lost because in year 1, they set the bar too high. And they've been trying to live up to that standard ever since. And maybe it was fool's gold, as we've talked about. The idea of winning 9 games, winning a 10th in the postseason, beating Minnesota in Minnesota, then losing to Philly the way they did, you kind of had to answer to that emotional high I wrote earlier this week. There was an emotional high in this franchise. This franchise was so desperate for good times, so desperate after what they went through with the second year of McAdoo and everything with Shermer and Odell punching the wall in McAdoo's first season, and letting down Eli, and Daniel Jones just wasn't going to do it, and Saquon's hurt, and Saquon's ACL, and Daniel's ACL, and the offensive line isn't fixed for a decade, and what's John Mara doing? What's Steve Tisch's involvement? Steve Tisch forced John Mara to fire Joe Judge, which isn't true. The idea that Joe Judge infighting with Dave Gettleman and the scouting department not buying into what Gettleman was selling, and Gettleman not listening to people in the organization. I laid it all out there for you in the story on NorthJersey.com this week. And I believe in today's print editions of the Record. So if you're still buying the print editions, which we hope you are, shout out to my dad, who's still a subscriber, and several others that I met today who said they were still subscribing to the Record. You enjoyed that story in print today. So where are we at right now? The reality is I still believe that Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll deserve to come back. I know some of you are done. I know you're done with everything. But are you done with Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll, or are you done with the losing? Because you've been done with the losing for a decade. When they came in, you celebrated them. You celebrated them in 2022. Remember, when John Mara said, "We're back," as he walked past reporters in Minnesota after that win, when the locker room chanted Daniel Jones's name, everybody bought into it. It was intoxicating for this organization because of all the bad times you had, all the missteps that you had. Now, do the mistakes that a first-year general manager in Joe Shane and a first-year head coach that Brian Dable, do they equate to the decisions and the mistakes that were made by Jerry Reese after they won 2 Super Bowls? Or by Dave Gettleman, who made a Super Bowl as a GM in Carolina and got fired for many of the same reasons that led to his downfall here? Is Brian Dable making the same mistakes that Ben McAdoo and Pat Shurmur made? Or Joe Judge? No. Is Brian Dable a perfect head coach? No. Does he have too much on his plate? Probably. They probably need to really examine that in the offseason and see what has been lost with Dable taking over play calling, because it hasn't been gained statistically or performance-wise by him taking over. Now, you can watch games and you can see receivers running open and you can make calls as to where they are as an offense. The reality is they are what their numbers say they are, and they're now averaging under 15 points a game. You can't win in the NFL like that. Now, that comes back to the quarterback. They are 2-11. They need a quarterback. Now, the hard part about the NFL is that teams are rewarded for losing. And if you're John Mara and you're Steve Tisch and you have this business model that's here, yes, losing is not good. Losing is embarrassing. Losing hurts. For a guy like John Mara, who has lived his entire life loving and breathing the New York Giants, it was a family way. We know the Mara family is heavily involved, heavily invested in the Giants. This is who they are. So to lose every week, to be laughed at in league circles, to have to hear reporters and radio and fans and get letters and emails and see a plane fly over the building, that's not fun. But the reality is, who was the laughing stock in the NFL for the last 15 years? It was Dan Snyder in Washington. Now, yes, Washington got new ownership. That's not happening here with the Giants. There's no sense that I get that the Mara and the Tisches are looking to sell off the Giants. So you can wear bags over your heads. You can talk about all you want about the Giants need to know, well, they need new owners. They're not getting new owners. They're not selling this organization. So where do they go? Well, the kick in the pants every Sunday is the idea that with every loss, the Giants get one step closer to getting the quarterback that's going to change everything for them. Now, yeah, is that a pie-in-the-sky way to look at it? Sure. They can miss on the quarterback. They can miss on anybody that they take in the draft. Shane's had misses. Shane's had wins. Look at the teams that right now are considered winners. San Francisco 49ers, they've fallen on tough times. How many quarterbacks have they gone through under the Lynch-Shanahan regime? Look at Washington. Washington, a year ago, was viewed exactly where the Giants are. They end up drafting the right quarterback. Jaden Daniels infuses some life into that organization. All of a sudden, everything starts coming together, and now Washington is in the hunt for a playoff. And it's 1 year. Remember, the Giants were in the playoffs the first year for Brian Dable as well, and Joe Shane. So I think today let's talk quarterbacks now, because the reality is the games matter, but the games are just kind of the footnote to what the bigger picture is. And the bigger picture here is quarterback. So today, Drew Lock, first half was not great. Missed his first 8 passes, only completed 3 passes in the first half. It just wasn't good. And I personally thought, and the question from our boys at K-12, my producer Paul Wood, Eric and the guys, the idea is that, when will Tommy DeVito get another shot? Well, they had some packages in for Tommy today, some zone read that Drew Lock really doesn't run, that they wanted to break out. I thought they would go to Tommy DeVito in the second half, and they didn't. And, with everything that Drew Lock can't do, Drew Lock actually some wild plays and led them back to get that final shot at the field goal to be able to give them a chance. So I'm not sure where the Giants go for next week. I'm not sure it even matters going up against that Baltimore team coming off a bye. But we'll see. I mean, the point I had coming out of the Tampa game is that everybody was talking about how Dable needs to be fired because he lost the team. Now, after the Dallas performance on Thanksgiving and after today, you can't use that argument. Now, you can use any argument you want to say guys need to be fired, the coaches aren't doing their job, the front office isn't doing its job. But if your number one argument for firing Brian Dable was the fact that he lost this team, that coaching staff coached its ass off today. We all walked in here and thought New Orleans Saints, Alvin Kamara was going to run for 200 yards today. You thought it. I think he finished with 44. The guys that were playing up front defensively on that defensive line, you had Elijah Garcia, was acquired via waivers from the Denver Broncos, second-year player, really hasn't played in the NFL. You had Casey Rogers from the practice squad. Elijah Garcia was signed up from the practice squad. You had Elijah Chapman, an undrafted rookie. Now, he played on passing downs early in the year, obviously had a big sack against Cleveland and in the other win that the Giants have had. But you had those three, plus you had Corey Durden, who they signed off of the Rams practice squad. All of a sudden, I guess we figured it out. The problem stopping the run was having Dexter Lawrence and Bobby Okereke, right? Obviously, I'm being facetious. But the Giants all of a sudden figured out how to stop the run today with a bunch of guys up front that had no business being in a game that mattered. But they were. I'm sure if you start breaking down the film, they weren't great. I'm sure they were, back and forth. Who knows how, you got to break down. I'm not worried about Pro Football Focus grades. The reality is those guys played hard. And they held Alvin Kamara to 44 yards. And everybody thought, present company included, I thought Kamara was going easy 100 yards today. Easy. How are they going to stop Alvin Kamara? Now, will they do it again against Derrick Henry and then Bijan Robinson in Atlanta and then come back here and face Jonathan Taylor against the Colts? And then, lo and behold, Saquon Barkley's run to 2,000 in Week 18? We're a long way from that. So that's where we're at today. I think the frustrating part of it for a lot of fans here, and I heard you, not everybody's rooting for a tank. There were fans chanting, "Let's go Giants" here when the Giants were able to get the ball back and have an opportunity to try to steal this game. There were cheers when Malik Neighbors made that catch across the middle and almost broke it, breaking 3 tackles, trying to get in. So I think, everybody wants their focus to be to the draft. So let's talk draft before we get out of here. I think the one question from people is just the idea of, this year's draft, what was different about this year's class versus the first 2 years? And I think part of it was trying to build a foundation. I think also part of it is developing their own scouting system and their personnel department and kind of feeling their way through it. So now this year they finally have a class that you can look at and say, Neighbors, starter, Newbin, starter, Drew Phillips, starter, Theo Johnson, starter, Tyrone Tracy, starter, Darius Muasau. Maybe he does develop into somebody that you can play as a starter as he did today. So, I don't know if that's exactly why they were able to make a leap this year, but I do know that they feel like they have something right now on the scouting and the personnel side. Do they deserve an opportunity? Now, let's talk tankathon. Giants, if they lose out, they will finish no lower than the second overall pick because Jacksonville found a way to beat Tennessee in Nashville today. So now it's Raiders 1, Giants 2, same record based on strength of schedule. Remember, strength of schedule, if a team that you played loses, that's good for your strength of schedule for the draft order. And the Raiders now have a lower strength of schedule than the Giants do. So any team that you have played, you want to lose, because that shows you that you must really be a bad team because you lost to a team that has already lost, if that makes any sense. So that's how that goes. All right, let's talk quarterbacks. Shedeur Sanders and Cam Ward, and then we'll get out of here, and we'll be back this week to do some other stuff on All In. I personally would have Shedeur Sanders ahead of Cam Ward right now. I think the Giants will consider both. I think they've spent already. They've done good homework on both of them. We've seen video of Joe Shane and Tim McDonald and Brandon Brown and Jesse Armstead at Colorado practice, kind of dapping it up with Dion and watching Shedeur Sanders and Travis Hunter. Let's say that. We expect him to go for a quarterback, but Travis Hunter is arguably the best player in the draft. I don't know if the Giants see him as a corner or a receiver. I don't believe they would be taking him number 1 or number 2 to be both, so they have to see him as one or the other. But let's talk Shedeur. And when you talk Shedeur, you have to talk Coach Prime. You have to talk Deion Sanders. I've heard this from a lot of people. I know the K-12 tailgate with my boy Paul and Eric and all those guys have been talking about the idea of the fear of Deion Sanders. And why are people thinking that Deion Sanders is a good fit for the Giants? Well, I'll say a couple things. Number one, and I tweeted this and I've joked about this a little bit. The Giants would never select a quarterback whose father orchestrates where he gets drafted. Are we totally forgetting 2004 and the role Archie Manning supposedly played behind the scenes to get Eli from San Diego to the Giants? But I guess that's okay because it's Eli and he won 2 Super Bowls. Or it's okay because Archie did it behind the scenes and he's not out front like Deion. And I will say this, I do think race plays a little bit of a part. All of a sudden, it's Deion because Deion is who he is and he's flashy and all that stuff. And everybody looks at it and says, well, why does Deion have to be, he's just going to be a disaster in this market? I just don't see it. Deion Sanders has accomplished more or as much as any player that's ever played for the New York Giants. He's a Hall of Famer, considered one of the best, if not the best player at his position in the league. Look what he's done as a coach at Jackson, now Jackson State, and now at Colorado. You know, the reality is that don't make stuff into a bigger deal unless it's actually there. If you don't like Shedeur Sanders as a player, that's one thing. If Deion Sanders tries to make a power play, and we saw the video from the other night, he and Antonio Pierce at the same function, and basically saying to Antonio Pierce, draft my Sanders boys, Shiloh, the safety, and obviously Shedeur. Yeah, I mean, maybe they do want to go to Vegas. So if you're the Giants, maybe you work out a power play and make Vegas pay you through the nose to get Shedeur there. But again, nowadays in today's NFL, there are a lot of power plays being made. Most of them are being made behind the scenes that we never see. With Deion Sanders, the one benefit, it's out in front. It's there for everybody to see. Deion's not working back channels. If he feels something, he's going to say it. What are you afraid of? Can it get any worse, Giants fans? We know it always can get worse. Pick the best player. Pick the best quarterback. Don't be afraid of Deion Sanders. Don't be afraid of what you think he may do. Because like I said, San Diego felt the same way about Archie Manning, and to this day still does. I remember being in San Diego for one of the last games, Chargers-Giants, and I remember those big fat heads in the end zone of Eli and making Eli and booing Eli, and just the idea of how San Diego hated the Mannings, and how could they do that to us? Giants certainly didn't have that idea of the Manning family. Giants embraced the idea that the Manning family wanted Eli to land in New York. So just something to keep in mind as we go through these next couple months and the draft and what we're seeing as far as where Shedeur Sanders ends up, where Cam Ward ends up, and what the Giants end up doing at quarterback. So that wraps it up from today's game, 14-11. Kind of wild, but, there are better days for the New York Giants ahead. I believe they're with Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll. If they're not, hey, we're still all in. We'll still cover them. It's the New York Giants. We covered them. I've done it for 15 years. I'll continue to do it as long as you'll have me, as long as our bosses will have me, and we'll try to keep it as straight as we can week after week for you. So on a day that began with a plain, here are the plain facts. The New York Giants are 2-11. They have lost 8 in a row, and they haven't won at MetLife this year. Bottle that up. Express yourselves however you need to express yourselves. But that's the reality. How do you get out of it? Well, we'll move forward and we'll come up with our plan. We'll see if it matches up with the Giants' plan. But that's all I got from MetLife. So for Paul Wood, I'm Art Stapleton. Thanks for tuning in after the game. Much appreciated as always. And we'll catch you this week as the Giants look ahead to the Baltimore Ravens. We'll see. We'll see what happens. So, Tankathon, no worse than 2 Giants fans. And the Raiders and the Jaguars end up playing, I think it's in 2 weeks. So if you somehow get a Raiders win over the Jaguars, well, then maybe you're sitting there at number 1 if you end up losing out. Again, thanks for being all in. We're all in as well. Check out all my coverage on NorthJersey.com. Everybody have a great night, and we'll catch you this week.